Kia ora koutou, everyone. For those that don't know me, my name's Fiona Reid and I'm co-chair of NZRise, who are hosting this event tonight. On behalf of the board, I'd like to extend you all a warm welcome and obviously to thank you kindly for giving up your precious time to attend our second event of the year, which is today all about the importance of tech to our changing economy. And I think we are certainly about to see some changes in that in the coming weeks and months. We have a fantastic lineup of panellists today, none of whom are short of an opinion or two, particularly John. And I can't wait to hear what you all have to say on this increasingly important and relevant topic. Today's panel discussion will be hosted by the inimitable and incomparable CEO of Snapper, Mickey Siksky, who without further ado, I will now hand over to begin our session. Really looking forward to it, guys. Thank you.
Great. Hey, thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you for that warm welcome. Tēnā koutou katoa, haere mai, everyone. Ko Mickey Siksky toku ingoa. Hello, welcome. My name is Mickey Siksky. Really pleased to be chairing this session today, which I think is really an important session that's been requested by NZRise members to better understand sort of the direction of NZ of tech in New Zealand. So today we're going to have a strategic view from a number of different perspectives. I don't know about you, just personally, if you might hear a bit of weather in the background, but it is absolutely tipping it down over in Eastbourne at the moment. But I'm assuming we're all experiencing the beauties of Wellington weather ourselves at the moment. So what we'll do today is I'll go through a process of introducing each speaker in detail. They'll have 5 to 6 minutes to cover topics and their perspectives, which gives us plenty of time for Q&A at the end of that. And I'm happy to moderate the questions. I'm sure the panelists might have some questions for each other as well that they want to ask. Please use the chat and the hand button on the bottom right-hand corner of BBB to basically express your interest in asking a question. So let's meet our panelists today. We've got Brecon McLeod-Lundy, who will be speaking first, who's obviously a long-time member and former co-chair of NZRise, or sorry, current co-chair. Sorry, I did not change his position.
I'm just getting fired.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just by some random guy. We have Matt Bostwick, partner manager from Microsoft, and John Allen, who's the chief executive of Wellington NZ. Brecken's going to kick off today, so I'll just provide a little bit more depth into Brecken's background. Of course, we all know Brecon from his role at NZRise and is the founder and CEO of Acima, formerly Rabbit Technologies. Brecken's also an experienced director from the Open Polytech of New Zealand, of PledgeMe, and was previously a director at Spiral Space, amongst other things. He's got a very wide view on this topic, and I think with some of those other directorships can provide perspectives not just from his own experience but from those other organisations as well. So Brecken's going to talk a little bit today about sovereignty, the role of technology in the region, and Aotearoa's future direction. So Brecken, over to you.
Thanks, Mickey. So I think there's so many levels that we can talk about the importance of New Zealand tech, and I think we're going to have some great views on everything from, the core, just having great jobs, having great income. But one of the bits I wanted to bring here in particular is, I think, the importance of having a good New Zealand tech industry for New Zealand to be able to make choices about how it actually solves problems in the future. I think there's a real danger with some of the work we're doing, and also if we underinvest, that we could be in a position where we don't have the right people or the right businesses to build solutions when we want to make choices in a particular direction. And that's across all sorts of sectors, whether it's education, whether it's government systems, whether it's tax systems. If we don't have a great, strong domestic technology capability, then it becomes steadily more expensive for us to build things that are the New Zealand specific solution. And that's not to say that every single solution should be the New Zealand specific solution, but for a lot of things, we're a bit different or we've got something unique that means that we should be having an industry and a set of capabilities that can really engage with that. I mean, I look at sort of some of the discussions that are happening within government around things like digital identity. And if you just pull off the international discussion, there's a lot of things around kind of tracking and sort of privacy around GDPR, whereas we have a very unique flavor because we need to be working with Maori and various other groups who bring our own views that are unique to New Zealand, and we need to be approaching these technology solutions in a way that has that breadth and that capability. And I think to do that, we have to have invested in the New Zealand economy and the people who will be part of these sectors in a way that they both stay here and stay interested in feeling connected to the New Zealand economy to keep working forwards. Because I think there's a risk at the top end that we go, oh, we become a great place to live, but all our devs are working on remote contracts or working on something where it's just, the highest margins become work for these offshore firms. I was talking earlier in another setting about, what are the tax settings? It's very hard for a New Zealand business to keep up if in New Zealand they're kind of raw cash things, whereas any offshore firm can turn up and be like, here's $150,000 worth of options on top of your cash. And the different scenarios make that a lot more compelling in different regions. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that feeds together of going, we have to have a great, strong tech industry to be able to have great people doing great things and solving the problems that are really important for New Zealand. And at the same time, if we've got those people, I think we'll get a better run into those other pieces, because if we're solving problems in a unique and great way in New Zealand, it's more likely that we've created something that's unique and great and that we can then turn into, a new startup or a new product or something else. There's plenty of instances where New Zealand, to my mind, is the right size to build something new. Like, we're not so big that it has to pre-exist, but also being big enough that if you then take it to, an offshore equivalent group or a next size up company or just a few other smaller countries or something like that, it's enough of a track record to keep reselling. So I think I'm really keen that we build an economy and build the capabilities that we have that focus on being able to be a great platform to launch from, as well as take care of ourselves. Was that my 5 minutes? That'll do.
Yeah, you've probably got another minute or two if there's anything else you wanted to cover there, Brecken.
Cool. I think that's kind of the big piece in New Zealand, and I think the other bit I just wanted to touch on briefly, I suppose, is also the role of New Zealand across the region, and as things become potentially more geopolitically tense, I think New Zealand has always filled a great role in being, hey, how do we turn up and create practical solutions? And I think technology is a really core one. We've done some work across the Pacific, and it's often been the case that us going in and saying, hey, we can come up with a pragmatic solution for a small country that solves this problem is really compelling when your other role as a country is, and this is a real thing that happened, one thing we were working on, a foreign government had come in and said, hey, you can have a copy of ours for free so long as you give us a copy of all your data, which is pretty cheeky, and I think speaks again to that thing of how do you balance capability and sort of your duties to be able to do the right things in any given situation. So that's probably the piece I'd add on, is it's not just for New Zealand, it's also for some of our responsibilities in the region, because I think we can be the best partner in that space.
Cool. Hey, thanks very much for those insights and perspectives, Brecken. I think there'll be some really interesting conversations on how we can start to dig into those a little bit further in the Q&A. So now I wanted to move on to introduce Matt Bostwick. Matt is Ngāti Mahuta, Ngāti Pūkeko, identifies as Pākehā as well, and he is the Partner Director at Microsoft New Zealand. His mission is to build the best tech ecosystem for Aotearoa. Matt's partner team at Microsoft supports systems integrators, resellers, distributors, digital agencies, and SaaS companies to thrive and grow. And he works with them to transform and enable New Zealand organizations. Matt's really passionate about driving digital exports for New Zealand, increasing diversity in tech, and supporting the next generation of tech superstars in Aotearoa. I had the pleasure of working with Matt in a former life, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's got to talk about today, where he's going to touch on talent and diversity, opportunities for public cloud in New Zealand, and the challenges with scale. So Matt, over to you.
Ngā mihi, Mickey, and kia ora tātou, everyone. Really excited to be here and humbled to be on a panel with such industry luminaries. So thank you indeed. There are three things I wanted to put on the table for a good kōrero today, and you know, there might not be things that we all agree with, but they're things that I'm passionate about, and I'm really keen to kind of see how we all line up on them. I guess the first one for me is this whole skills issue. As a partner lead for Microsoft in New Zealand, I get the privilege and the pleasure to work with 2,500 New Zealand tech businesses that in some way, shape or form either use or leverage or deploy or support Microsoft products and platforms. And I have to say, the number one thing that I hear day in, day out is how hard it is to find great people. And if I reflect on where tech as an industry is, we are as an industry the second largest export earner for Aotearoa. And it hasn't always been that way. But I have to say, my ambition is that it's the top. It's number one. My ambition is that we become the top export earner for New Zealand. But when I think about the issue of finding enough people in New Zealand with the tech skills we need to grow the sector and to be that top export earner, I keep coming back to this one thought. We're not dealing with a talent issue. It's not a talent issue. It's a diversity issue. Because if I look at the industry, I see, despite all of the incredible work and mahi that everyone across the industry is doing, I see just 27% of industry, 4%, less than 3% Pacific peoples. And to me, if we can solve that diversity issue, we will go a long way to solving the talent issue, because by default, we'll be bringing a whole lot of new, energized folks into the industry. And that will go a really long way to supporting that ambition that I have, and I know many of us would share around how we raise the global exports for tech out of New Zealand. That's the first issue. The second issue for me is around hyperscale public cloud. And I'm sure you will have all heard that Microsoft has announced the development of what we call a data center region here in New Zealand, and that will bring all of the key Microsoft platforms, Microsoft 365, Dynamics, and of course the Azure stack here. And when we announced that was coming here to New Zealand, IDC did a report that had a look at the if you like, the tech dividend that, or the cloud dividend that we can expect off the back of that. And this isn't just the revenues, the public cloud revenues, but this is the dividend that is driven, the cloud dividend that is driven on the back of services that surround that public cloud growth. And their estimation was that there's a $30 billion dividend to New Zealand over the next 4 years from the development and the growth of some of those public cloud platforms. And of course, we're not the only hyperscale cloud provider to announce that investment in New Zealand. AWS have done the same. But the other really interesting thing about it was the IDC report, and happy to share that with the folks on the call. The IDC report talked about creating an additional 100,000 jobs, or the creation of an additional 100,000 jobs, again, in and around that public cloud investment. And the way I see it is we all understand the number 8 wire mythology about New Zealand. And I think many of us would identify with that and really kind of see ourselves a little bit in that idea of innovation. You know, any problem can be solved with a piece of number 8 wire. Well, here's the thing. The one thing that New Zealanders didn't make with number 8 wire was number 8 wire. Number 8 wire came from a factory on a coil, and you know, turned up at the farm gate, and off you went. And the way I look at it, that public cloud infrastructure that is coming here is the new number 8 wire. So for me, it's not going to have an impact on our innovation. It's going to help us drive the next wave of innovation, because how do we use that public cloud infrastructure to create the next great innovations and bring our software smarts to it? And just very quickly, the last thing for me, you may have seen or heard some of the reports back of the Prime Minister's trade delegation up in the United States. We had the privilege of hosting Prime Minister Ardern at Microsoft to meet some of the folks there, but we also had the privilege of inviting a number of our software partners, the likes of Lawview and Aura, Volpara, to be part of that delegation and meet with not only the Prime Minister and some of the other delegates, but also to be part of the connection at Microsoft's HQ. And for me, the key thing about that is how important partnerships are to growth. We're great at innovation in New Zealand, and I think, Brecken, you talked about that. But in order to scale globally, and in order to get ourselves on the global stage, New Zealand software companies and New Zealand software developers and innovators need to leverage global partnerships to go global. Mickey, back to you.
Thank you very much, Matt, for those insights and perspectives as well. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of kōrero on the public cloud side of things, but also that skills topic as well. It's an area that NZRise has been focusing on for some time. We had a very interesting session just a month or so back, really around internships and growing talent. And I know that this is something that John is particularly passionate about as well. So it's my pleasure to now introduce John Allen. John's an experienced chief executive, having led New Zealand Post, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and most recently the New Zealand Racing Board, prior to his current position as the CEO of Wellington, New Zealand. He serves on several boards, and I think importantly for this group, he's the Chancellor of Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. John's going to talk about the domestic economy, how tech sector provides necessary growth for Aotearoa to thrive, what's needed to scale in the New Zealand context, and the challenges within that. So John, over to you.
Kia ora tātou. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk with you. I was taken by the previous speakers in a range of different ways. I mean, Matt posed the challenge that is faced by this country as a small, remote island in the bottom of the world in actually delivering anything really remarkable to the world. And David Longy, as I was reflecting on Matt's comments, was I think appropriate when he said that we were a country shaped like a dagger, strategically positioned, thrusting at the heart of Antarctica. By which I think he meant we were largely irrelevant. We were certainly remote. We were bloody small. And I think the truth is that being small and being remote at a time when we've got all these geopolitical tensions in the world, at the time when we've got a pandemic which is impacting supply chains to markets, at a time when we're dealing with the wicked sort of problems like climate change that have already been talked about, requires us as a nation to make choices. And that was a comment Brecken made when he was talking earlier. And I don't think we've been very good at making choices. I don't think we've been very good at deciding where it is we think we can make a real difference and how we can make that real difference, and making serious investment against those opportunities. So to Brecken's question of whether we were underinvesting, I say absolutely we're underinvesting. I don't think we have as a country yet really understood the potential of this sector to create jobs, to create opportunities, to create solutions, to create products, to create connection with the rest of the world. And I mean, just the 30 billion sort of opportunity that's just been sort of dropped on the table is perhaps one example of that, but I think there are myriads of opportunities. So my core proposition is, and always has been, that New Zealand needs to double down on its investment in tech. It needs to double down on the number of businesses that we have in the broadest tech sector, and it has to grow more of them. That means it has to develop more talent to support that activity. It means we need to connect to and develop our own investment community and get it more mature than it currently is to drive that activity. But it also means, importantly, that we need to change some of our fundamental attitudes. And Matt was talking about the number 8 wire sort of proposition. I've got 3 that I thought I'd just put on the table in this brief sort of introductory thing to stimulate some ideas. The first one is, and this will be a shocking idea to people who, as Kiwis want to be humble and have humility and all that sort of thing, we've got to start talking about our tech sector. We've got to be actually visible to our communities and visible to our society. And the reason that becomes important is you're not going to engage your new generations, you're not going to encourage your new generations to actually think about tech careers, think about the opportunities in the sector, if you are invisible. And when you say to me, as you probably will because you're all much deeper in the sector than I am, my God, we're absolutely out there, everyone knows all about us, and Volpara, everyone knows. The truth is that's not the case. I've taken with Serge Van Dam walking tours around Wellington since I started in this role, going into SaaS businesses largely, but also gaming businesses and things within about 5 minutes walk of my office. And there's about 100 of them within about 5 minutes walk. If you're walking with Serge, he walks quite quickly. But the reality is that I take senior influencers, I take politicians, I take local politicians, I take people who you would think knew our sector extraordinarily well, and they have no idea. Zero idea, zero understanding that those businesses exist, zero understanding about what those businesses are doing, zero understanding about the potential in those businesses to make a difference. So my first proposition to you is the radical one: we've got to tell our story better. We've got to put it up in lights because we want to inspire a new generation of young people to become those tech pioneers of the future. The second, and this is an even more controversial idea to the politicians, is we need to back winners. Now, this is a real anathema to the sort of New Zealand egalitarian, sort of concept that everyone should get a fair shot. But in my view, it's really, really important that we identify those businesses that are successful and are scalable and have the international application, and we wrap services and connections and all of the opportunity that we possibly can around them to enable them to really kickstart and fire up. And so, in my mind, yes, we need to do incubation, we need to do acceleration, we need to do all of those sorts of things, we need to do internships, we need all of the pieces of the jigsaw that we know about. But critically importantly, is we've got to make sure that our founders of the businesses that have the most potential are given the support they need to achieve scale, to be significant on the international stage. So that's my next thing. Don't worry too much about fairness. Let's back some winners. And then my third proposition is we need to harvest the ideas of our universities and tertiary sector. Now, this again is a radical idea. It would get me deeply offside with many academics who think that means nasty commercialism and money and will corrupt the purity of their thinking. But the truth is that there's a hell of a lot of really exciting thinking and ideas within the sector, and commercializing that and helping it drive this growth that I think is necessary requires training of academics into what is possible, requires linking of them to founders and to investors. I mean, I know Univentures and others are doing this to some extent, but I just think we're scraping, we're just at the smallest edge of what's possible here. And I believe that is an important ingredient in firing the sector up. and enabling its future. I've got about 4 or 5 others, but I will stop because I think I've done 5 minutes, and there's lots to talk about in the previous presentations.
Awesome. Hey, thank you very much, John. Thanks for those thoughts. And look, I think they're, like I say, they're like, for some will be controversial, but others they will seem like actually very obvious things to do in terms of actually building the sector and making sure it's got the firepower that it needs. We're now moving into the phase where there's a chance for questions to the panelists. So if you do have a question, please put it in the public chat, or simply, given the numbers that we have, really comfortable if people just raise their hand there using the button on the bottom right, and I think you can address your question to the panelists or the panel as a whole. Feel free to do that. So opening the floor now for those who have any initial questions.
Can I just ask John a question into panel while we wait? I think one of the questions I always have, and I think picking winners, to me, picking winners is always a bit like saying I really want to just make sure I get the right lottery numbers this weekend. And I think maybe it comes back to the skills piece. I have real doubts that we have the skills in New Zealand at the point that we've got them to be able to say, oh, we could do that really well, versus more broad-based mechanisms. And I suppose one of the other things I look at there is I think there's the trying to get in early for the return, which is great for investors, versus for New Zealand, where I think is we need lots of large, stable businesses that stay. Like I think 1-0 that stays in New Zealand and employs a lot of people and stays employing a lot of people in Wellington is hugely more valuable than a startup that grows really fast, sells itself to a firm, founders walk off with much money, and they might put it back into the New Zealand economy, but they might not. But they don't create that stability and growth of jobs in New Zealand. And there's something there that I think I'm worried sometimes about some of the aspects of the startup community, and also that New Zealand founders have a little bit of a habit of selling comparatively early in the journey. And certainly when you do that early, it's also much easier for a buyer to go, oh, maybe I'll keep a dev team in New Zealand, but I'm moving the strategy, I'm moving the executives, and suddenly you wake up and you're going, oh, all the executives are in America, with the exception of JD, who just hated America, but also still owned enough of his business that he could just move back here.
Yeah. So there's a fair bit in there. I mean, a lot of it you and I agree with. I mean, what we're talking about is how do we scale our businesses to a size in which they can have a sustainable and impactful presence in our economy and in our communities. So that's the ambition. What I'm saying is not so much picking winners, although that's the language but backing winners. So what I mean by that is that identifying those companies that are showing strong signs of growth and strong market, a strong proposition into the market, and whatever the criteria might be, and making sure that we wrap support around those organisations to enable move more quickly and scale more quickly than they might otherwise. Now, the sorts of things that I'm thinking about, and I'm very limited in this because I don't have the depth of understanding that the rest of the people in this call do, but the sorts of things that I'm thinking about there are, providing them with better connections into both national and international investor communities, national and international experience in terms of particular elements of challenge that they might be having, providing them with access to sort of international leaders in those areas, and enabling that knowledge transfer that might support them. It's that sort of thing that I am anticipating in that space. And then the last comment you made about selling, it's one that's exercised me for some time, because this is true not just in the tech sector, but in basically all business. New Zealand entrepreneurs tend to be early sellers. I'm becoming less concerned about that, because of what I'm beginning to realise is that most of the tech companies that are being spawned, at least in the Wellington market, or many of them, have been spawned because people have been part of previous organisations and businesses, whether under Rod Drury's leadership or Sam Morgan's leadership, or out in the wetter world or something, and have sort of learnt from that experience, have made some money and are reinvesting. So I think we are now getting a fairly good degree of reinvested and recommitted serial entrepreneurs, and that's a culture I quite like. And think if we can support them in doing that, and they keep on doing it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So yeah, there's a 2-second response that sounded to you like probably 2 hours.
Hey, thanks, Brecken, for the question, and John for the response. I've got a question for the whole panel here, and one of the things I'd love, in particular, people to lean on is their experience outside of their current role. So I'm thinking particularly, Brecken, for your role at the Open Polytech, and John at university, and Matt in terms of some of the work you've been doing in the diversity side of things. There's often an argument made that, as you articulated, Matt, around talent. People can't find talent, and it's often pointed towards the education sector as needing to do better or do different, or somehow produce ready-made talent for that. I'm interested in your views around how we're performing, not just sort of relative to where we've been before, but in comparison with other markets, around our ability to educate people, and how that's fitting into sort of that pipeline of talent growth.
Do you want me to jump in, Mickey, and then
that'd be cool.
I mean, I have to say, this is a question and a topic that is asked and talked about every single day at Microsoft New Zealand. Every single day, I will talk about this with my team, with Vanessa Sorensen, our MD, with the rest of the senior leadership team. So it is a massive focus. I mean, you asked a number of questions in there. So, what are we doing? Whose responsibility is it? Is it just about education institutions? The answer is, it is every single one of us. And I guess my point is, when I say this is a diversity issue, not a talent issue, the talent is there. We just haven't created enough diverse pathways into tech for New Zealanders in order to take advantage of that talent. And when I hear New Zealand businesses say, if only the government would change the immigration settings, that would enable me to be successful in my business, I think to myself, sure, that's got a role to play. But if we don't, as an industry and as a nation, build the long-term sustainable pathways into technology for our rangatahi and our tamariki into the future, we're just not setting ourselves up for success. And I just don't think it's feasible to think that you can kind of have this, on-tap immigration policy that's going to save us. So, because, guess what? Another pandemic comes along, or whatever happens, another country's got a better setting. And so, perhaps some of the overseas grads go there. I mean, it's just, to me, it feels like, we have to take responsibility for this ourselves. And so for me, that is everything from kura, primary schools, high schools, polytechs, universities, internships, grad programs, but also how we as tech companies are thinking about a massive array of opportunities. People that are retraining, people that are coming back into the workforce after taking time out for parenting, people who are looking at mid-career shifts, people who are perhaps coming out of an industry that is maybe on a downward trend and going, what are the skills I need to learn to jump onto tech, cloud, software? And so, whose job is it to take a, 40-something female who hasn't had any tech training experience but has had other work experience and make her work ready to come and work for any of the tech businesses that are represented here tonight? Whose job is that? I mean, I look at that and go, well, that's partly my job. I mean, I would love to have more people with Microsoft certifications that can then be employed by the 2,500 Microsoft partners in New Zealand to deliver great software and tech outcomes for New Zealand organizations. So there's an awful lot going on there. And, one of the ways that we are aiming to solve for that, or play a role in solving for that, I guess, is an initiative that is called 10K Wahine. And that is a program that came out of our employees. It wasn't a Microsoft program of just a bunch of folks got together and said, why aren't there more women in tech? And we stopped, complaining about it and moaning about it and said, well, what are we going to do? So we've created a program that is aimed at engaging 10,000 women in New Zealand around tech and tech training. And there's multiple ways that we do it, through going into schools, partnering with Tuputoa, partnering with OMG Tech, right through to supporting retraining, supporting people in our partner ecosystem to upskill. So that's one way. Happy to share some details on that, but I think it's all of our problem, to be honest, Mickey.
Thanks for that, Matt. Brecken, your thoughts on this topic, particularly wearing your other hat?
Yeah, I've got that hat, and I might talk it with some other hats as well. I think I agree with a lot of what Matt said there. There's another piece before I put on the educational side of it that I think I want to talk a bit more about what John said before around telling our story. And I think there's one key part of that for tech that I'm becoming steadily more worried about, which is that 10 years ago, when I was hiring young people or people coming from somewhere else and said, hey, we want to achieve some social good with technology, they were like, great, I aspirationally believe that technology is a way that you achieve social good. And in the last few years, that has become something that now you have to convince someone that that is the case, and you have to prove it each time that, yes, this piece of technology I am building is actually good for the world, because there's been so many cases, whether it's what we've seen with extremism via social media, or by the fact that a whole bunch of people with pictures of primates have managed to dominate the social picture of all the silly apes. The flavor that people have publicly has got even worse, quite apart from the other things. So it's become so much harder to convince people, by doing tech, you will be doing good and hitting that value stuff. And at the same time, value stuff is becoming more important across society. And I think that piece of the story in particular, quite beyond just making sure people know what our businesses are doing, is really key in getting those stories out there of this is genuinely good. On the education side, I agree there's a lot of stuff around making sure the options to get in there are flexible. Not so much with my OP hat on, but with some of the chats I've been having with the Ministry of Education, there's obviously ideas like apprenticeship-based approaches to getting into technology being made available, and that's a slowly moving idea, but it does seem to be gathering steam, and I think we see really good evidence for that being a good approach for a lot of people. And then I think the other piece that comes into it is you very quickly get to the access piece of the discussion, and do the people who you want to be building this have the day-to-day exposure and access to the systems that means they'll be getting familiarity with technology, and so then it's a smaller step to go, okay, now I'm going to learn a bit more, now I'm going to learn a bit more. And I think that comes from both having flexible learning, that means you can do a bit at a time, and having things set up so that you've got that access as a baseline to try it out and do that next bit, and having that be natural. And expecting that for some people that's a 10-year journey, and for some years people it's I'm going to get really motivated and do it in 6 months. But both of those journeys need to be supported.
Cool, thanks for that, Brecken. John, your views on this?
Look, I agree with most of what's been said. I've got two other points that I would make. The first is that I think for particularly Māori and Pacifica young people, it's really important that they can see themselves in the industry. And so I think mentoring programs that put Pacific tech sector people in front of young Pacifica people talking about the opportunities and benefits of the sector are much more compelling and much more likely to be successful than if it is that it's not someone that they can easily identify with. And indeed, we've been running, and others have too, a range of mentoring programs with the young Māori, young Pacifica, not just in the tech sector, but more generally, at about year 8, year 9, somewhere around there, so it's early rather than late. In fact, it probably needs to be earlier than that, I think, if you believe the educational researchers. But those programs work really well, and they work really well because it's from their community to them in a way that they can understand. So that's my first point. The second thing is I'm increasingly thinking that we're too narrow in our thinking about what the tech sector is. So you know, while I presume most of the roles you're talking about are coding type, technical roles in terms of the actual driving of technical stuff in the sector. But as you think about it, I mean, in fact, designers and creatives and UXs and I don't know what else is, there'll be all kinds of folk that you need to support these large and scalable sort of organizations. So I think perhaps we don't want to limit ourselves by saying, look, the only way into this sector and to be being a contributor in this sector is through a particular. I mean, I'm I suppose agreeing with the pathways point, but it seems to me that there may be multiple pathways into a tech career, and they may not necessarily be because you've been able to complete a coding course at Dev Academy. Good though that is, there may well be others as well, and we should be thinking about how we can package all of that up rather than perhaps necessarily just focusing on those more technical skills.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John. I think you could argue that almost every company is a tech company these days in terms of their requirements to design meaningful solutions for their customers, whether they're technology based, in terms of pure software, or whether they're using tools to do that. I mean, so much of our experience now is a digital one, which kind of leads me on to an interesting thought. I mean, I was sort of in advance today. I was looking at Sir Paul Callaghan's call to action from more than a decade ago. New Zealand being a place where talent wants to live, and you could argue that in a world where more and more work is happening remotely, that actually might be what happens. But it might not be with New Zealand companies. I mean, we see it now in the local sector where, a number of large Australian entities are basically targeting, tech talent here. They don't have to move to Australia. They can live here. They can pay tax. And, you could argue that New Zealand's getting some net benefit from that. But to me, it raises the question, which is actually a much more broader question. It starts to pick up on some of the things that Brecken was saying as well, is that is New Zealand Aotearoa a place where people do want to live? Do we have a society that, represents the type of place where people with those talents and skills want to be? What's our basis for competition? So it's much more of a philosophical kind of question there, because it really, to me, starts to point to if the tech sector is going to be successful, to Brecken's point at the start, it gives us choices. It gives us choices to address a range of issues in society that maybe make things a bit more equitable for people, that maybe allow us to solve some problems that are a bit harder when you don't have that funding. So I'm interested in the panelists' thoughts on that. There's a lot in there, so you can pick up one thing if you want. I mean, particularly, you could look at that the impact of remote. You could look at, how New Zealand is positioned as a place where talent can thrive. I'm going to start with you, Brecken, on that philosophical question.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot of angles to this. One of the ones that I've actually I've met with Minister Clark a couple of times when he was talking about, setting up these visas for, extending people who were, already in New Zealand before COVID hit, and then their visas were expiring and things like that, and the timing. And one of the bits of feedback I really wanted to get across to the government, and I'm just not sure that they got it, was one of the biggest challenges we had talking to staff who were on those immigrant visas and things like that was that quite apart from whether the visas managed to get put one after the other and they got through on time, the feeling they got from the government was the government just didn't really want to be dealing with them, and it was really a bit of a hassle that they had to extend their visas and deal with all this. Some people went home, but a lot just didn't feel welcomed. And I think quite apart from where we sit in our how many immigrants should we have in any given year and how do we want to balance our immigration policy, I think it's really important that anyone we do say, oh, please come to New Zealand and join the country, they then have a good experience and they write home saying, moving to New Zealand was great and the experience is good, because then they're also, they're far more likely to actually connect with New Zealand and feel like New Zealand is a long-term commitment and something they invest back in, and not just like, oh, I went to New Zealand because I got a job and it was better than where I was. I think that's really key in any of the immigration side of that. I am very worried about the possible world where we just have a bunch of devs who live in Wellington or move to slightly cheaper bits of New Zealand but are all working offshore. I think some of that is absolutely fine. I think it's a great way to get more revenue into the country. But I think, and maybe this goes back to sort of what John said a bit when he said, oh, I'd be happy with having startups that grow and then sell and then grow and then sell. But I think one of the things that concerns me about that is there's a set of skills you build at that end of, like, we could end up with a lot of great devs, but I think to grow past that, we have to have a great supply of people who are experienced managers of bigger businesses, people who are experienced managers of businesses that go all the way through growth and get to a big stage, of people who can move towards that side. Because if we don't have some of those, then we'll just reinforce that it's constantly small business and then go through the loop again, because you can't find those people in New Zealand. And I think those roles really define where strategy and things like that happen. And sometimes if we got the package right and we got the where you live and the balance of what comes through to you right, I think there's some really compelling stuff we can do there. On a personal note, I do constantly worry about, I think most of our governments in the last few years have taken if we hold off on having population growth, whether it's through immigration or anything else, then the infrastructure will catch up. I'm pretty much the inverse, and I think we have to have population growth for anyone to ever actually build the infrastructure that would be at the scale to make our cities work well. I cannot see the evidence of, if we wait a few years, suddenly our infrastructure will catch up and then we'll be able to start growing again. I don't think it's going to happen. Anyway, that was, I think, 3 very different points, but people can take it where they want to.
That's great. Matt, I'm going to hand the baton over to you and see what you're on with.
Well, it's interesting. Microsoft in New Zealand is actually remarkably small as an organization. I think it's under 200 people that work for the Microsoft New Zealand entity. But every now and then I bump into someone in the office that I haven't seen before, and I say to them, oh, great to meet you. I haven't seen you before. What's your role? And they'll say, oh, I'm working on building AI tech for something crazy and incredible. I'm working on the next iteration of the Azure Kubernetes service. I'm whatever, part of the security engineering team that's doing deep tech engineering. And I'm a New Zealander and I get the freedom to, or I'm, someone from offshore, but I get the freedom to work remote, and I've chosen to work in New Zealand, and I'm on my way to, an NZRise community event to share my insights and talk to others in the community. So that's pretty cool. And in fact, we do have in Wellington a part of the Azure engineering team that is building Azure Kubernetes service, and not a lot of people know that this really incredible cutting edge technology that is powering businesses all around the world is being built by an incredibly talented group of Wellingtonians, and they were part of Green Button when that was originally acquired by Microsoft. So that's kind of interesting. I think New Zealand is a place that talent wants to be, and we've just got to figure out how we want that to work and how we make that work, not just for us as a country and as an industry, but also for those that want to come here. One observation, or one thing I would share, our focus the partner team at Microsoft, particularly when it comes to software partners and SaaS partners, is how do we leverage our global connections to help them scale massively around the world whilst being based in New Zealand and having their dev headquarters and their product headquarters and their marketing and business headquarters here in New Zealand. That was awesome to have Lawview, for example, with us on that delegation. And one of the things that they talked about when the Prime Minister was in Seattle was that they're actually going to launch a sales hub in Seattle, their North American sales hub. And partly that's on the back of the partnership they have built with Microsoft. It's great to be there and be connected into that fabric. But they, keep the rest of their dev crew and their leadership and their marketing and everything else that they do is based in Tauranga. So fantastic outcome. But you might have heard one of the words that I used in that last sentence. I talked about product development, product management. This is one of the big areas of one of the big gaps, and we're about to pilot a program working with a local New Zealand partner that does a lot of work around product management to help some of our software companies build their capability internally around product management. And that is an area where I think we have massive need in New Zealand. So there are so many areas where we need to keep thinking about all the pieces of the puzzle that we need to build on to help companies like Lawview, Volpara, Aura, be these massive, big global unicorns that they deserve to be. So that's an interesting one for me. And yeah, I don't quite know how we do it. And again, it came back to that point around, well, whose job is it to get more capability around product management into the tech sector? And we sat around at work and went, well, maybe it's ours. We'll just see what we can do. So trying to do a little bit in that regard.
Hey, thanks for that, Matt. John, just some observations from you on that topic.
Well, I mean, there was a lot in the question that you posed. First, in terms of place where we want to live, the first thought that I had when I heard you say that is, it reminds me of the phrase that we use all the time, that we punch above our weight. That somehow New Zealand is heroic and everywhere in the world is looking at New Zealand and desperately wants to live here and desperately wants to know what New Zealand's view is on every issue. And it's just not true. I'm not saying we don't have some very successful people, and I'm not saying we don't have some very able people, but I am saying that New Zealand needs to work harder than probably any other country on the planet to actually make its way in the world and build the connections that it needs to enable it to do that. So my view of the notion that we can just sort of sit back and expect that talented people will want to come to New Zealand because we all know how fantastic it is and the world knows how fantastic it is, I think is a mistake. And I think it is unlikely to be an effective strategy. What we do know is that lots of talented people do come here. And the reason that they come here, on some occasions, it's entirely accidental, in the sense that they meet a Kiwi somewhere and they decide they're going to come back and live in New Zealand as a consequence of that sort of love interest. But when you start talking to people about what it is about this country that attracts them, it does always tend to be something about the flora and fauna, the green credentials or elements of our place. It's something about the work-life balance that they're able to achieve within our society. It's something about the community sort of underpinnings of the New Zealand experience, and particularly in that context, actually often the treaty and how that works and the partnership sort of principles that have underpinned the development of the country. So, well, I mean, I know I'm generalising across a big cohort, but nonetheless, I think if we want to attract talent, it goes a wee bit to the point that was made about authenticity, about actually, understanding who we are and being very clear about who we are and sustaining and maintaining and articulating our values. So that's my first comment. The second comment about people living here and working offshore. I mean, I think that's fine at one level, but it's not optimal for the country. And it's not optimal for the country because we know that we need some large firms in whatever sector we're talking about, sort of frontier firms as they're characterised by the economists, to actually drive the ecosystem that will deliver the talent and deliver the sort of impetus and support to all these startups and emerging businesses that we're looking to spawn. So I don't believe that a structure which has basically a whole lot of very capable people living here but effectively working offshore and developing scale in international markets in that way for international firms is going to be a particularly successful or sustainable model for our country. So in my mind, that's not where I would put it. But I'm not trying to rail against what's inevitable, that people will do that, but I am wanting us to actually focus on developing businesses here.
Great, thank you for that, John. Just another invitation really for anyone in the audience who's got any questions or comments that they'd like to add.
Yeah, Mickey, I've got a question actually. I'm keen to hear the panel's opinions as to how we could market our industry way better to attract the diversity, but just people en masse to it. When I think of what BCITO have done over the last 10 years to attract people to the trades and how creatively they've done that, when you think that our industry is meant to be full and is full of these really innovative people, I think we do a bloody shit job of actually promoting ourselves as a go-to place. What do you think we should be doing better to invigorate our industry to actually so it becomes a sought after place to have a career in? Who wants to go first?
Shall I direct that to Matt to start with?
Yeah, I was looking at him.
What have I done? Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Let me just share a reflection. I do feel very lucky to work for an organization like Microsoft. I get to kind of deliver on my passions, which is helping grow tech capability and diversity in New Zealand. But I've got a whole lot of really interesting resources and capability behind me to draw on. So that's useful. Here's the thing, though. We often sit around and we go, right, what can we do to better engage people around tech? And the thing that works all the time is if you go into a school and you talk about Xbox and Minecraft, you instantly have the attention of a bunch of 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And probably the single most important thing we've done to support this kaupapa around engaging better and creating a better story, if you like, for people to come into tech is the development of Minecraft education. And in fact, a year and a half ago, we worked with a local game studio to develop Ngā which is the Māori version of Minecraft, or a Māori world inside Minecraft. And that also is used by schools. So, that's part of it. How do we actually, give people a taste of some of the really cool things that we can do as an industry to get them excited about the possibilities. And I think going back to a point that John made is it's not just about coding and development. There are so many other exciting roles. And I talked about product management before. that's about, it's a little bit of marketing and product fit and, testing, product ideas and ideation. And it's just so many different things here. I mean, you can come out of university with a degree in arts like I did and actually have some relevance to the industry. So that would be the thing for me is let's think about what are some of the really cool things that we have access to as an industry that we can use to engage people where they already are, because people we want to talk to, they're using our products all day, every day. You think about phones and games and the software that we all produce and deploy and support. So that's the thing for me. And then, of course, the final thing is, we keep kind of forgetting that we have this entire Xbox world. And it just astounds me that, we don't do more with that. And I take that's on me to sort out. But we just have so many cool things that we can do. We have a lot of cool gaming studios in New Zealand. We're working with a few of them. How come no one knows about that? If I said to my kids, hey, do really well at maths and science, and you get to go and work for an awesome gaming studio and make cool games that are about education and exploring and learning and, and all the other things that they love about games, they'd be really excited. So I think we've actually got it all there. We just need to figure out how we get better at connecting the things that people know and use into how they could see themselves working in that world.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Brecken, I might get you to go next and get John to wrap that up, because I know John's got he's got a storytelling job as part of his role, so for Wellington NZ, so I'm sure he'll have some views on this.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been that how do we tie the idea of this learning to something you can actually do with it. Like, it's always been a very small subset of people in any part of the tech industry who are there just because they like moving ones and zeros around. I mean, I'm sure it's some of them, but I think most of the people who just like moving ones and zeros from one side of a line to another all just became accountants rather than developers. And I think, it's always been different what that is. And I think, there's the practical stuff. I think there's been that cohort that has come through Minecraft. I call it the tail end of the Commodore 64 days, which meant that you could be playing a video game and then got dropped into actual coding immediately, even just to work out why the hell your disk drive wasn't running. And I think coming back to some of the stuff around, getting more diverse people, and it's about having good, easy stepping stones of here's how you can use these technologies and these things in a more creative way and in a confident way to be able to achieve your tasks. And I think that goes all the way down, right? Like, it's not just getting people into the tech industry specific stuff. It's going, are we doing all the stuff so that the base tech capabilities are there? I mean, I was talking to, I think it was someone at the Ministry of Ed the other week about, how they were giving laptops out during COVID to kids. And then they were like, oh, and we had a problem in some of the poorer sectors where, some other family member would end up taking the laptop all the time to do stuff. I was like, well, then just give them another laptop. Like, if you're in an environment where most people are locked down and we've got other people who are still, we know are in a poor environment, who are going, oh, I'm using this for stuff, like, there's just more need for digital there. There's not there's reasons why we, it's politically easier to give laptops to kids for education than it is to just hand them out to people in general. But I think there's some real necessary, having that in all sectors so that you're building capacity and capability, each bit one after the other. Because also, if your parents don't understand programming, then going and getting that career, even if you get it, the judgment you get from your parents is just kind of like, what do? You just sit in, I think I was in that generation of, if you got a job in programming, your parents were probably just like, well, it's pretty disappointing that you're not a rugby player. I don't think anyone ever thought I was going to be a rugby player, but definitely a disappointment.
Well, if you were growing up as I did in Hamilton in the 1970s, not being a rugby player was more of an existential crisis, frankly, than worrying about what your parents thought. Surviving school was challenging. I've talked a little bit about this, and I think already, and I agree with all the comments that have been made. Just two thoughts to add to the mix. One is, I think we can get quite creative about the sorts of partnerships we might put together to develop these pathways. And the one that I'm thinking of here is something that Paul Ritamanu, who some of you will know is in the hospitality sector in Wellington, has done with tech businesses in Wellington. As a consequence of just sitting at the same table as some of them in a hui about the economic prospects of our city and how we were going to deal with the talent crisis. And what he found is, look, people didn't know how to get into the tech businesses. They couldn't quite work out how they were going to fund their university. This is his community, the Maori and Pacifica community. And so what he's doing, they've gone into the schools and they're identifying, talking with mentors, Maori and Pacifica mentors about the tech sector. So that's the first thing. Second, when students then want a job while they're at school and then into their university time, he employs them in the hospitality sector. The advantage of that is, he says, they learn the soft skills. They learn the interpersonal skills. They learn all those sorts of bits of the jigsaw that they might not necessarily get either at university or perhaps in some elements of the tech sector. While he then supports them through university, they get their, or university or Dev Academy or whatever it is, their program to get their skills, and they're then taken by one of these tech companies into their programs, whether intern programs or directly as employees. Now, that hasn't, that's just sort of underway. It hasn't generated its first candidate right through, but it struck me as a really interesting model of a partnership that you wouldn't necessarily think of, but which actually works really well, probably for the output of the actual young individual, but also for both sectors. Hospitality can't get people that they need, to do their stuff. Tech can't get people to do what they need. So by combining forces, they've got a solution, or part of a solution. So that's just a thought. And obviously you could think about that in lots of different ways, but different sectors. The other thing that I think is really, really powerful for the tech sector, that and it goes a bit to Brecken's point, that people are now seeing it as somewhat less a doer of good. I think you've got to tell those stories about purpose much more powerfully. So there's no doubt in my mind, when I talk to young students at Vic, that lots of them, I won't say all of them, but lots of them, far more than in my generation, are driven by purpose. That is the most important piece for them in defining how they want to work, how they want to live, what they want to do. And again, it's a generalization, but I do think it's really important. And I think that the purpose story for lots of the businesses, the tech businesses that I've dealt with, is just phenomenal. I think Volpara's been an example tonight. In fact, all the businesses that you've referred to tonight, I could take a purpose statement and say, Godfathers, you have to work with these guys because they're changing the world, that could apply to Microsoft as well, of course. So I think there's something there that you shouldn't forget.
Excellent. Hey, thank you very much for that, John. And thank you everyone for all of your attendance as well. We've run a little bit over time, but I think that's been really useful just to get these perspectives from our panelists. So I'd just like to thank Brecken, John, and Matt for all of your contributions today. I'd like to thank Fee and the NZRise board for hosting the event. I think the recording will be useful for others and look forward to making that available. So thank you all very much and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. That was awesome.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.